Hey there, how are you? Good morning. Welcome. I hope you're doing well. We're here to talk about value. Do you have value? Are you using value in a sensible way? And what really is this stuff about value? My name is Gottesdiener, and I founded a small company called EBG Consulting. And we help people discover to deliver high-value product. So this topic of value is very relevant. And a lot of the work that we do intersects a space that really is about the collaboration of product management, requirements, and project management. And what I want to do this morning is share some practices that we have been using for some time on client engagements that we found is actually quite practical. And we'll be building with you a model that we're going to call a value model. Now, I don't know if anybody here is a Twitterer, but here's the tweet information should you like to do that. Path to Agility and my handle here. And you could add value if you like. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to give away some books. And the first book here, The Requirements by Collaboration, as well as the Software Requirement Memory Jogger. And I'm very proud that we just finished and published my third book, co-authored with Mary Gorman, called Discover to Deliver. And I have about 7 of those and one of the other books. So Dave's going to help. At the end, we'll do a drawing. And there's 2 bags that will go around. What we'll ask you to do is put your card in there, or if you don't have a card, just a slip of paper with your name and email. And I just want to let you know, in exchange for going in on the drawing, we'll put you on our newsletter list. We will send out an occasional newsletter, maybe 6-7 times a year. And the folks asked me to, Bart, running this conference, asked me to go out in the tent to do signings. So I'll just call the names later and we'll do the signings out there. Okay, so let's get started. Can you relate to this? See all these cards on here? Maybe you even have more cards and more cards. Story cards. How many of you have that situation? You have a plethora, a whole host of stories in your backlog. Yeah, yep. So a lot of us can relate to that issue. And maybe you use this canonical form for describing your stories as a I need to, and then you have the value. Some of you may actually use an approach to writing your stories that starts with the value. So value. Anybody use that? So that, value, as a I need. Nobody use that? Okay. What I want to know is, whose value is that? Whose value is that really? The user role's value? How do we know that that's really giving them the value that they need? And maybe we need to balance that value of the user with other perspectives of value. I mean, after all, what you're doing is you're taking those requirements on the stories and you're allocating them to plans. And this image indicates a plan. Take a bunch, you allocate them to a plan, to a planning horizon like a release, 2 months down the road, or even an iteration down the road. When you really think about it, all you're doing is allocating the high value requirements to a plan. How do you make those decisions? It's really about value-based decisions. And you're doing this constantly. You're doing this for long-range planning, the big view, the preview, and the now view. The big view would be maybe a year or 2 years or 3 years. What we might call that plan is a product roadmap. How many of you have a product roadmap? Okay, very few people rose their hands about this. The release level is the preview level. Generally a couple of months, depending on how quickly you can release and the acceptance from the customer point of view. That's the release or preview level. And then you're allocating to a plan for the now view. How many of you are using sprints or iterations? All right. Anybody here using Kanban? A few of you are using Kanban. So your now view is going to be that sprint or iteration, which is a 2-week cycle. And the now view, for those of you using Kanban or Kanban, depending on how you want to pronounce it, that's your work in progress for today. And the deal is you're allocating requirements to those different planning horizons. Why? How? Supposedly based on value. Value, value, value. This is the big mantra that we're always hearing. We deliver value. But what does that really mean, and are we really delivering value, and how do you know you're delivering value? So I'm curious, I want to ask you, call out, how do you use value in your project teams today? How do you use value? You use value to? Do you use value to what? Prioritize, okay? So you're ranking to prioritize. How else do you use value? Planning, decision making, figuring out who to engage to get more information about what to build. Let's really think about how you might use value, and we'll look at tools for using value. Because when you think about Agile, what we really want to be doing is a continuous flow of value. So on the left side, you discover and you understand and seek out what the value is. And on the right side, you deliver and release that value, and you go through this cycle continually. So during discovery, we're visioning, envisioning, we're eliciting, we're exploring, we're doing analyzing and valuing and planning. And then we come into our delivery, and we're building and we're testing and deploying, releasing and checking on value, and the results of that come back in, and we continually a flow of value. So really, you know, when you think about it, value is supposed to be the heart of what we're doing. But what really is value? I really like the definition that you see here from the value standard and body of knowledge. That value at the top here is a fair return or equivalent in goods, services, money for something exchanged. So it's what you get for what you give up. What you get for what you give up. Something important. Now, value, though, is tricky, because value can be tangible and intangible. Let's dig into this for a second. How many of you are project leads, project managers? Show of hands. Okay, so small, about maybe 20% of you in the room are. And oftentimes the tangible aspects of value is what the business folks are looking for. Things that you could measure financially. Value is, from the business point of view, often making money, increasing revenue, avoiding costs. So you protect your revenue. You save operational expenses. You avoid, how many of you are working in a regulatory or compliance environment? You could get fined. So you want to avoid the cost incurred potentially with regulatory fines. And you want to improve service in general. And you might measure that with economic measures, like economic value added, or return on investment, internal rate of return, total cost of ownership. So that's all good stuff. But there's also another kind of value, the intangible value. And this is very interesting because it's more human-oriented. Intangible value comes from the social aspects, the experiential aspects of working with your product, right? So the financial stuff, that sort of comes from the functionality of the product, but the intangible stuff is quite different. It's the sense of belonging, the sense of self-fulfillment that you might have. I'll give you a little example. I travel a lot, and I have to shop for airplane flights. Now, have any of you heard of Hipmunk? Hipmunk. One or two of you have heard of Hipmunk. Hipmunk. I love shopping on Hipmunk for flights. I don't like traveling, and I find the process of finding flights very difficult. But Hipmunk, it's cool. I mean, even the name of it is cool. And one of the things that grabbed me experientially the first time I used Hipmunk, well, there's two, but one of the first things is that it understands me in a cool kind of way, because I can see flights in order of their agony, literally agony. So it uses an algorithm knowing, my dates, that it's going to look at the duration. There's a rules engine behind there, looking at duration and looking at costs, and mixing that up and showing me, ranking the flight options. Now, the other piece of this also is it understands me that I'm busy. I don't want to have to go through a lot of time in comparing, so I get to see a comparison of my options in order of agony. And if I want, I could just sort by price or by duration. It understands me, so that experience is very positive. That's something very difficult to measure. That's something more intangible, that kind of aspect of the product. But it's really crucial when we're thinking about value to think about the tangible as well as the intangible. And in the end, we need to have a product that is desirable, it's worthy of my time, it's utilitarian, and it's also, of course, from a technical point of view, it's possible to build, it's feasible. This is another aspect of value that we need to think about. Value is not always about just money. And value also can be very difficult to measure, but sometimes really does need to be measured, okay? So if you are familiar with those of project leads, project managers in the room, the PMI has the Agile Certified Practitioner. And just look at that first domain right there, value-driven delivery. It's the very first domain. And the other domains listed also mention value. This is a big mantra. And for those of you familiar with the International Institute of Business Analysis body of knowledge, we have now an extension to the BA-BOK guide. And we have there's 7 principles. And what I listed here are the 5 that very much focus on value. The whole third one, analyzed to determine what is valuable, is focused on value. And the other 2 are also focused on value. So where does value play out? I mean, what activities are we doing around value here? Well, when we discover, what we're doing is we're first speculating what might be valuable. And we do elicitation, we do visioning, we may often need to study our users. And then, based on that understanding of value, we plan to do some delivery. So as we cross into the delivery from discovery, we have made a decision. This is another very key point that I want to talk a little bit more about with you. Decision making around value, right? So we come into discovery, from discovery into delivery, I should say, and we release the product based on what we think we understand the value is. We have some idea, some hypothesis we're going to get some value from that delivery, and then we need to confirm that in fact we got that delivery. That's a piece that's often missed. So when we release and confirm, we're going to come back into discovery, and we have to decide again, do we continue investing? Perhaps we need to divest based on the feedback that we got from confirmation about value. Now, what we've seen over the years in working with Agile teams and teams transitioning to Agile is there seems to be some very deeply rooted problems around value, which is a very interesting conundrum because, Agile is all about deliver value, but we have these issues. We have bloated backlogs. We have product owners or product champions that have difficulty making decisions. Anybody notice that? Difficulty making decisions? Have struggle making prioritization choices, or product owners going in and going out. Or perhaps at a demonstration or review you discover, no, that's not really what I think I really need for my customer. And I think it's really crucial to unroot these issues. Many of them are around value. So what I want to share with you is some steps, 4 steps. Now, please be aware these are meta steps for tackling this issue of value, for being really real and transparent about value. And the first one is to define the ends. I mean, you have a product. Oh, by the way, what we're going to do is I'll take you through these 4 steps, and then we'll summarize and see them again at the end. And I'll show you as we go how a model of value gets built out, okay? So defining the ends to start. You have a product, this box, and this is an image that we used in our book for the product. The product could be a software product. It might be a system that contains software and hardware, a very complex system. Some of our clients build medical devices or machines that operate in data centers and printers. And your product could be a service. In fact, many products combine maybe even a tangible physical product with services, whatever it is. Now, for illustration purposes this morning, I want to give an example at a very high level using a conference coming up in August, the Agile 2013 conference this year. But let's say we have an ends that we want to focus on, a vision for next year's conference. And we want to build and refine a world-class site that provides a broad array of resources to serve all conference participants. And let's just imagine, it's a very simple example of what might be a snippet of a vision as our ends. That's next year's conference, not this. And you'll see why the planning horizon here is important. It's not our immediate planning horizon. It's out in the future a bit. So here's the start of our value model. Step number 1 on the left, the ends. And the ends begins with having a product vision, which is amplified by some goals. Where are you high level? Where do you want to go with this product? What is it going to do? How's it going to benefit your business and your customers? And we quantify those goals with objectives. And what is an acronym we know about objectives that makes them very clear and measurable? Anybody know that acronym? Yes, SMART, which stands for specific, measurable, attainable, realistic is usually what I use there for the R, and T for time-based, okay? Specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, time-based. So they can be very clearly measured. Now, how many of you know the ends for your product? Show of hands. Wow. Am I only seeing 2 hands go up? For one of many of you probably are working on multiple projects delivering a product or set of products. You don't know the vision? Do you know the vision? What is the end game? That's what's over there on the left. It answers why. Why are we investing in this product? The product is just the means toward the ends. To get to value, you've got to start with a clear understanding of those ends. The product is just a means to the ends. So that's the first key thing that we have to know. And time and again, we've discovered when we come in and help us with clients, helping them with value-based planning, or working on some of these bloated backlog issues, or helping product owners to make some of these decisions, we often find that teams don't have a shared understanding of what's there on the left. and that we need to pull everybody together to gain that shared understanding. First, context counts. This left side, the ends, is the meta context we need to go for. Now let's look at the next step, and that is to determine the product partnership. And there's a couple of steps that we're going to go into when we look at this. What do I mean by the product partnership? Well, the thing is, and this is actually a big thing, that value is in the eyes of the beholder. So whose value is it? By the way, I'd like to mention there's a learning game, an Agile learning game. How many of you are familiar with Agile learning games? Right. For learning versus for doing work, there's other games which are facilitated activities for getting work done, say in a workshop. There's a wonderful learning game that Mary Gorman, who was my co-author, partner in crime in our book, she co-invented at the Agile Games Conference, I think it was about 4 years ago. And the title of that game, and it's really about value in the backlog, the title is similar to this. It's the backlog is in the eyes of the beholder. So if some of you are familiar with the website Tasty Cupcakes, you can go find that game there. And Mary wrote a great article. If you're interested, just email me and let me know. I'll send it to you, about the invention of the game and our experience playing the game with small and large teams. Value truly is in the eyes of the beholder. So who are these beholders? This is who we call the product partnership. And it's a bit of another perspective of thinking about stakeholders, because you know what? In the end, great products are built when there truly is a partnership. So let's explore this partnership for a moment here. We have customer, business, and technology. The customer part of the partnership, as you would imagine, are going to be the users, the direct end users, as well as the people that are buying the product. If it's a commercial product, clearly a buyer, or we sometimes call them the chooser. So you think about the user and the chooser. Sometimes they're not the same person. Sometimes they may be the same person. And if you're building software for internal IT purposes, there's not technically a buyer that's putting cash out, but they have funding. So it's generally going to be somebody in the business management realm. And often these customers have advisors that tell them or speak in their ear that advise them or give them relevant information about the choice for using or choosing the product. And sometimes they can be very important to consider. Their value considerations could be important. So then we also have the business. And as you would imagine, of course, the business partnership includes the sponsor for the product and the product champion. The term we prefer is over product owner. And that champion may have a community of other champions that they are collaborating with to understand value. And then we also have providers, business partners who provide, say, components or business services. There's lots of situations that you might have where there are other partners and their values might, in some cases, be in conflict with your own. We're going to talk about that issue. And again, we may have advisors here. Often those advisors are people that we end up calling subject matter experts on the business side. And then when it comes to the technology, these are the people that are building the solution to deliver the value. Now, they have value as well, the builders, and they may have advisors. For example, in one project I worked on, we had a global technical architect who was an advisor for this particular product, and he had a global perspective as opposed to a local perspective. So people on the delivery team, they too have some value that they need to lend. So if we go just to sneak into our little case study a little bit, to think about who some of these people are. This is the first part of the second step. is understanding who these people are. So let's look back at our example with the Agile 2014 partners. Let's think about this for a moment. Okay, clearly an attendee is going to be in the area of the customer, right? So again, we're looking at users, buyers, advisors. Who else? Who else would be in this stakeholder group as a partner? Who do you think? The attendee's boss. Okay. More? Yeah?
The speakers.
Absolutely, the speakers. What about the speakers? They're going to be using the website. Who else? Sponsors, excellent. Vendors, somebody said. Sponsors and vendors. Right. Okay. Any other ideas? Yes. No? All right.
Well, actually, the facilities.
Right, the facilities people, they may or they may actually be more like business partners as far as direct using the product. Yeah, in the back.
Your potential future attendees, like maybe people searching on Agile conferences that haven't attended yet.
Right, so they may not be attendees that have already attended, but they may be potential attendees. We may call that a subtype of the attendee role. And actually, that's a really great point, because they may have distinct value from current attendees. And there may be features that they may find useful depending on who they are and to draw them into the conference. So let's look at some more examples of the other partners, and then I'll show you a little bit of a sample solution. So let's think about the business partners for the Agile 2014 version of the site. We have the sponsor, we have the champion, we have the providers, our business partner providers, and advisors. And here's one person, the Agile Alliance chair. They're certainly in that business realm. Who else when it comes to business?
People that are putting together the conference.
Right, the people putting together a conference, the conference chair. Absolutely. Anybody else you can think of?
City, community.
In fact, the conference chair is most likely going to be the sponsor. I'm sorry, is going to be the product owner. And this person would be the sponsor. Yeah.
Yeah,
Dave?
like the professional industry, the developers, the project managers. You know, there's a whole group of professional industry that would have interest in what we do.
Professional industry people like developers and so forth, would they be more like the actual users of the site? Or you're thinking of them more in terms of they're going to be business partners?
Business partners of interest.
Okay, that's very possible that they may also be in that realm. Okay, and just to briefly check on the technology partners, we have the conference IT staff, and we may have other people that we're partnering and subcontracting or outsourcing or insourcing that are also partners in here. So let's look at a little example of sample solution. I'm just trying to get the juices going for you to think about. This is actually very important to explore our partners, because we're going to get to this. They each may have unique, overlapping, or conflicting value considerations. So we have the attendees, the speakers. How about folks that are reviewers? Over the years, I've played a role either chairing a track or co-chairing a track, or as a reviewer. I certainly have some values in my role as a reviewer and some unique needs that I have. And the sponsor, people that are sponsoring and paying money. How about the media folks? So there's a broad range of possible players here in that partnership. And ditto when it comes to business and technology. So if we return back to our value model, we had the ends over on the top left there, we're going to plug in a little more information about these partners. We need to know who these partners are. Very recently, we had an experience working with a client, and they wanted to be able to do some value-based release planning. And by design, prior to coming on site, we made sure that we did a bit of exploration around this partnership. so that we had a cross-section of those people in the room. So as we have found from time to time, and maybe you are experiencing, not everybody has a shared understanding of the ends. So we were going through a brief exercise in reviewing the vision and the goals and a bit of what they were calling the objectives. And the technology people kept interrupting the business folks that were explaining this, in particular the product champion, and asking questions. And all of a sudden, one of the other business people paused and said to this has really happened, said to the IT folks, you know, you really need to learn our business. I'll tell you, you could have cut the air with a knife. There was dead silence. And then after a moment, the lead architect and the scrum master said, well, we really appreciate that. And actually, this is the first time we've had the opportunity to talk with you and the subject matter experts. And in fact, and then they started briefly saying, we're really excited to hear this because we have some ideas from a technology point of view that can help us get to those ends quicker. Now, of course, we wanted to seize that moment, so we paused what was going on and facilitated a brief activity where they looked at how can they form more of a partnership. And it was really wonderful because one of the very specific ideas that one of the business people came up with was, well, how about if we arrange for you to come and watch some of our customers actually using the product? And you may call that, there's different names for it, observation, contextual inquiry, and so forth. So we just spent about 15 minutes planning how they could get engaged in forming that partnership. And that ended up being a pivotal moment. Those few moments were quite pivotal, having and forming that partnership. Now here's the thing. Each of those partners have their unique value considerations. A value consideration is a variable that particular partner uses to assess the value of a product option. Now what I mean by a product option is it's an alternative or a choice among various product needs, which eventually get translated into requirements. They may be in the form of features, stories, minimum marketable features, and so on. Okay? So those options have different value and value consideration. So let's take a look at this. This is a very important distinction that I want to make between a feature and a value consideration. So in this example, we have a feature. It's an externally visible piece of functionality, such as finding a healthcare provider. Now, the good thing to do, and Andy mentioned this actually in his keynote, to get to value considerations is ask why. Why? 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 Why, right? Root cause analysis. And to get to the why, then you will discover the value considerations. Oh, okay. So I am an elderly member of a healthcare. And I'm saying, hey, find healthcare providers. Why? Because I need to find providers in my network. Why? Because I need to know what my choices are for in-network providers only. Why? Because I'm living on limited funds and I can't go out of network. I can't afford it. Now the value considerations for that particular partner, who happens to be a user, and we have a little profile information I've shared with you, it's an elderly member, is that they're cost conscious. Now, the value consideration for a different partner for that same feature might be different. Let's say it's you, or it's me, okay? And we look at this 5 why, you may not, by the way, have to go down 5 times, but let's say I've got this find healthcare provider feature. Well, why? Well, because I want to find healthcare providers in my network. Why? Well, because I want to look up, go look up choices to find out who is really good at doing what I need help. Why? Because I want to be in control of my health. Okay? Now there's a different value consideration. The value consideration of being cost conscious is different than a value consideration for a person that wants to have control over their health care decisions. An elderly person, I have two 85-year-old parents, and their cost consciousness is very strong, right? Where for me, and maybe for you, as the generations have changed, our awareness about having control over our health has changed quite a bit than in my parents' generation. The value considerations can be different for different partners. Value is in the eyes of the beholder. So, examples of some more value considerations. Some of our customer partners may really value convenience or cost or how quickly they can get something done. And from a business point of view, as I mentioned, often it is some of those tangibles, return on investment things, but it can be some of the intangibles, which are often harder to measure, that are valuable. Like that I need to be on par, I need to gain market share, and I need to get to the market quickly so I don't lose my branding or the perception of my ability to deliver in the marketplace. And from a technology point of view, it's very interesting that a lot of the value considerations actually wrap often around quality attributes. We want to exploit our existing technology. Or in one situation, worked on a project team, and the lead architect had some value considerations about experimenting with cloud computing and big data for a larger use architecturally across the organization. His value consideration got trumped by the product owner's value consideration about protecting privacy, which was the decision that they made, which was the right decision. But often it's quite interesting that we don't always consider those value considerations. And I have seen some incredible, brief but powerful conversation between IT folks discussing their value considerations and the business folks discussing theirs, and a lot of learning happening. So what we want to do, let's go back to this idea with our Agile 2014 value considerations. And what we want to do is think about explicitly naming, listing, discussing, conversing about the value considerations for our different partners. So the Agile Alliance chair, they care about brand recognition big time for that website. Right? What else, what other value consideration might you think another partner might have? What does the conference chair care about? What is valuable to them? Him or her? Any thoughts about that? Sorry?
These feedback review sheets.
Getting feedback, so having a high quality conference, very important. And I'm going to know from year to year what makes high quality conference. The speakers, having high quality speakers is really important from feedback point of view, okay? So that's great. So we would get some energy going around those value considerations. Once we understand who the partners are, of course, that's a precondition to doing this exercise. And again, let's think about the value considerations for our business partners. The Agile Alliance chair the Agile Alliance chair is interested in brand recognition. We were looking at, I didn't pause on this one. Let me go back to the customer, which has an attendee. You as an attendee probably have a big value consideration around learning. But what else, if you were going to the conference, what else is a value consideration you have as an attendee? Cost, right? You may have a limited budget. You may be cost conscious. Anything else? The location of the conference, absolutely. That's a big deal actually in planning because the conference chair knows that location makes a big difference. People take vacations depending on time of year around the conference. And that has actually monetary impact on registrations, okay? So great, these are the things that we want to think about and make very explicit. And in this example around the technology partner, we have value considerations around exploiting the existing technology, right? Because we want to make use of what we currently have now. Another thing that sometimes I see here, when teams are honest about it, they want to be able to use the learning, the technical learning that we have on staff. And it sometimes can be very challenging in some of the areas that I work in. There's a lot of competition for high-tech people. And you want to draw in people, not using older technology, but having newer technology. So a value consideration is people being able to learn and use new things and retain their technical staff. And this actually is an issue depending on the physical location, where people are located on the team, in the business. So they can vary, again, by product, by location, by time. So value is in the eyes of the beholder. And also, value can change with time. Value can change with time. Let's think about the conference chair at the Agile 24 conference and this year's conference. There's some monetary issues at stake if rooms don't fill out. And with time, as we watch people register and hotels fill out, people can get, the conference chair might get a little bit nervous. Does anybody know why, from a money point of view, what's going on there?
They may have committed to the hotel.
That's right, exactly, very good. They commit to the hotel. You have to commit to the hotel a certain booking, a block of rooms. And if you don't sell that block of rooms because they're giving it to you at a discount, by contract, you may have to pay a fee. So maybe initially, early on, I'm going to be very concerned about getting that block filled. So what will I do? What will I start to do? What behaviors will I take as the conference chair to fill up that block so I don't have to risk my money? I'm going to offer discounts, exactly. And I'm going to do some promotional activities, etc. So that value is going to drive certain features to happen. So as you see here, we have up on the left still from our first step that we understand the value and the ends for the product. And then in the second step, we understand who the partners are and we study their value considerations, because they need to be transparent and explicit. And this is just a photo from a recent session where, in this case, actually the product manager, who is the product champion, is at a section of the wall. We make heavy use of walls to do this work. Very explicitly write down, have on the wall value, the three partners, and listing all together the three partners, listing what the value considerations are. Share you another example of how this played out at a large financial services organization that we worked at a few months ago. And they were working on trying to make release decisions about a portion of their sales application that had to do with training. And it has to do with being able to sell their products only if agents are properly trained, because there's regulatory requirements around that. Okay? So we listed on the wall who our partners were and what their value considerations are. We had things around regulatory violations and being able to make money by selling the product and so forth. And what ended up happening is it became very clear that there were different value considerations between sales managers and the actual sales agents. Okay? And only by putting this out here and putting it out on the wall explicitly and studying it did we first expose that. Now I want to come back to this story and tell you about decision making and how this got clarified, okay? So we imagine you have on the wall value considerations, as I'm illustrating in this photo, and some of them are in conflict. How do you deal with that? Let's go back to that. So now the third step is to select high-value product needs amongst a whole bunch of choices. You have this plethora of options, those story cards representing the product needs options. You can't boil the ocean. You can't have everything at once. We understand the ends. We understand the partners and their value considerations. Wow, we got this backlog full of stuff. How do we filter it? We filter it with value. With clarity around value, we then pick a subset of those options, and that's what we're going to build in the next release or iteration or whatever you want to call your delivery cycle. So how do you do this, and how do you use the value as a filter? Well, what we've found is we want to have good conversations, but not just random conversations about these product needs and value. We call them structured conversations. So we start with an option. That option might be a feature, it might be a story, it might be a capability, it might be something from the vision statement, some words or verbs that are big and chunky. And we explore possibilities, what those options might be. And then taking our value considerations very explicitly, which have often in a room, in a workshop room, been listed and ranked on a wall after we've collapsed them and made decisions about the high value ones, then we're going to evaluate and select a subset of those. So we go through a thinking and evaluation process that takes conversation, that's transparent, and we select a smaller set of those higher value at this point in time, because remember, value can change with time, and value is in the eyes of the beholder. Now once we understand what that subset is, for all of those selected options, we're going to do confirmation. And confirmation really means two things. It means, well, how would we check to make sure that we built this properly? Many of us call that acceptance criteria. You can use many different techniques for that. So during delivery, we built it correct. But there's another piece to this. How can we confirm that our assumptions about value were right? The only way to do that would be to test post-delivery. And that's the other key piece of confirmation. Identifying what our hypothesis is, what are we going to get out of that? Which is going to take us in a few moments to the last step. So we go through this conversation over and over again. And the really cool thing that we found about it, this meta pattern for the conversation, it's the same conversation regardless of whether you're talking big view, like product road mapping, preview, like release planning, or now view, like work in progress or this iteration. Over and over again. But notice the key, the filter, we slice or we subset our options based on value, not on taking a story and slicing off, the user interface or slicing off part of database. No. We've explicitly explored options and we use value. Now, in order to do this exploration, the other piece of it is we have to dig in just a little, just enough, but quickly, into what we call the 7 product dimensions. And these 7 product dimensions allow us to explore holistically those product needs, which is another way of saying requirements, okay? And the 7 product dimensions, we go within and across. So briefly, what is the user? And by the way, we use these symbols and we put them on the wall and we use the colors semantically. So people start talking about, well, we need to talk about the purple stuff, right? So let's look at what each of these are very briefly that are part of the conversation. The user interacts with the product. Interfaces, the product has to connect to people, devices, and systems. We need to know the options. Action is, that the green stuff like the feet indicates, that's the actual capabilities, the behavior, the process, stuff that usually people talk about when they talk about a product and features. There are the stories that are articulated, I should say, in stories and in minimum marketable features and features. But you don't have action unless you act on data. So the product needs to store relevant information and data. So we need to explore options here and value those. And control, like the stop sign, the red stuff, well, that of course is going to be our policies and rules. And remember, we're using this same approach very quickly to explore options across the dimensions, within the dimensions. So the granularity is going to change. So for control, at this level, I might be just talking about very high level business policies when I'm doing release planning. But when I'm at the now view, I'm going to be thinking about the specific rules, right? And then we have the environment, because the product lives within some physical environment. Anybody here working on a product that's a physical product? Anybody? Most? Okay, nobody here. So if you are working on a physical product, what's the environment that that product is working on? A few years ago, I worked with an organization that had a product that they were building that was used outside in rainy, wet situations. And that made a big difference to consider for options in the physical aspects of that product. But then there's also, from an environment point of view, we need to explore what the platform is, the hardware, the software, the standards. And this holds true for the operation as well as the development of the product. It's interesting from an option point of view is with environment, for many of you working at large organizations, there's not a lot of options. You're very much constrained by a given technical architecture. And then we have those quality attributes as another dimension that we need to explore options around. Boy, those are the ones that we really get caught with not having explored properly. The quality attributes often are called illities, although they're not all ending in illity. Security, reliability, availability, performance, testability, scalability, et cetera, et cetera. There are options here from the operational environment as well as the development environment. So what we want to do is explore, as we say here, the options within and across those dimensions, and use very, very critical that we're using value to very quickly slice through what are the high value options. So these four make up the functional: the user, the action, the data, and the control. For those of us that have a requirements engineering background, you know, the funky functional and non-functional. And interface, environment, and quality attributes are about the non-functional. So we're holistically getting an understanding of the options, and we're going to slice for value. So let's go back to our value model. We have the ends, and they're delivered via the means. And what we're doing is that product there at the top, we need to know what the options are. Not all options are created equal. Some are more important than others. When we were talking about the Agile 2004 site, do we care or value in our next delivery cycle more current attendees or prior attendees or prospective attendees? Because our decisions will vary based on who we care about. There are options. So what we end up doing is we put those options on the wall. And we explore this very, very quickly. We call this an options board for the 7 product dimensions. And we have value over here on the left. And we have the 3 stakeholders and their value considerations. The information has been rubbed out to protect the innocent here. And then we have the symbols. And underneath those symbols for each of the dimensions, we will list in both text and visual form, whatever makes sense for that domain, very quickly what the options are. And what we'll do, and I've done this many times, is I like to use either a yellow or orange marker, and I will hand it to our product champion and ask them to star or circle for this next delivery cycle, what are the high value options? Oh, and how do they know? Because they are listing, and I'm turning my head because we've noticed a pattern called the head swivel. We've had them list the value considerations by partner, and they may be on a separate poster or in another part of the wall, and they'll keep turning to look at those to make those decisions. And the team is conversing about this, and it's very efficient. And they quickly make decisions about what they're going to build. So we did a similar thing like this in this situation that I was talking about where we had some conflicting value considerations with the sales agents and the sales managers, and we had those right up on the wall. So I want to come back to that and how we got to decision making there. So optioning across within the dimensions, you pull those together and you have some choices. And in this example, they're not written as stories. They could be written as one-line features as you see here, but this would be the result of the optioning. And our next step is going to be to actually make a value-based decision. Okay? So I have all of these options, and one consideration that I have that's important is what time is it? Right? What is the delivery cycle? Where am I now? What is my planning horizon? That becomes a very clear thing that we have to think about because, as I said, not only is value in the eyes of the beholder, but value considerations change with time. Some of them are static, but some in fact change with time. So a part of our evaluation is to understand benefits and risks. Now you know this stuff. The benefits protect and increase the value of your choices, and the risk can decrement or take away from those choices to the product. You know, we worked with a client who was very concerned, this is an example of how time marches on and can change value considerations, because a competitor had come out with a portion, a feature of the product that they had actually been talking about but not acting on for 9 months. And in this highly competitive situation, you need to be on what we call on parity. So they needed to have at least some of those fundamental features available to the market. Now, that then became a risk that they weren't going to get to market on time, and it could decrement the overall value of the product. You also have, you've probably seen this, where on the technology side, there's risks, right? So in one situation, we had a feature that was highly valued, but the technical folks were really concerned about the bandwidth issues with their current network configuration and the expected volume for this new feature. Are we going to be able to deliver it? That's a risk. So that might calibrate how soon I might want to tackle that feature. Right? So we have to balance the value with those kind of things, with the benefits against the risks. And in the end, we have to make a choice. We have to make a decision. We call it a value decision, coming back to our value model. So we had our options here that we talked about. And now what we have to do is take those options and in the end do an evaluation so we can make a decision. And of course that decision has to align to our ends, right? Looking at the value model. So if we go back to our example with the Agile 2014, and I'm thinking about, well, you know, it's next year if I'm looking at my planning horizon. But if I'm going to look at a release for September, and the conference happens to be in August, what is going to be the highest value of these options that I have? And as the conference chair, I'm thinking about getting buzz and having people be able to stay in network. There's a tremendous amount of networking that happens at the conference, and people, you know, how do we connect aside from just email? So this idea, and I'm making this up sort of, this idea of being able to communicate after the conference is very powerful. And we want to be able to read the latest news around post-conference events and planning for next year. So we want to have this cycle where people get excited, and we want to draw out on some of those intangible values about sense of belonging that people have and community. And the experience of having been to the conference and staying connected, okay? So my value considerations are going to inform my choices among the options, and they are going to be calibrated by understanding risk and being very mindful of what my planning horizon is. But now we come to a piece that's really, really tough. Who makes the decision? Who are the value deciders? Who are your value deciders? Product owners. Anybody else have a different view or different value deciders?
Customer.
Sorry?
Customer.
The customer. The end customer?
Yes.
Paying customer.
The paying customer. So they actually are engaged in making the choices themselves? Or do you have, as many organizations sometimes will have, a proxy for the voice of the customer in the form of a product owner? I wonder, do we always build just what the customer wants? I don't think so. Remember that user story? Whose value is that? A user story is a user story. That's the user's value. What about the business value? What about the technology value? We want to form a partnership, collaborating to make that decision. But hold on a minute here. Fist of five. How many of you know the fist of five? Right, for making decisions in a consensus way. Is consensus always the best decision rule? It is not always the best decision rule. Over many years and working with many teams and being very focused and energized by the idea of collaboration, what I've discovered is that there's a pattern that we need. And that pattern, and I wrote about it in the first book that I wrote, Requirements by Collaboration, is called Decide How to Decide. People need closure. Actually, Andy mentioned that for those of you who went to the keynote this morning. We do need closure. We need to know how we have decided. We need to have a decision rule and a process that we know and agree upon that makes sense at any point in time. And consensus is not always a superior decision rule. Often, and probably most of the time, it will be the product owner or product champion who will make the final decision. However, we're making a participatory decision when we use a process that checks in along, I like to use something called a gradient of agreement to check in, where do you stand? And with all those three partners together and having had optioning conversations, we can make those decisions actually much more explicitly and act on them. I've been engaged, I'm on the delivery team and the technology partner. You've heard my point of view. Oh, okay, now I understand your point of view from a business point of view and what we know about the customer. So in that example that I was telling you about before, with conflicting value considerations for the sales managers and the actual sales agents, we had our one product owner, product champion, who we had discussed and explicitly talked about this. And we had about a 10-minute conversation. I like to practice using this decision rule and process at the very beginning of our planning session or our refining session, depending on the situation. Backlog refining also may be a place where we'll use this. So we had a poster on the wall that described our decision rule and our process. And I had the gradient of agreement up there. They'd already practiced that. And we said, you know what, we need to figure out what really are the value considerations. And I facilitated a small activity where different small groups and subgroups came up with a ranked ordered set of the value considerations and did a couple of iterations of that, turned to the product champion, what are your value considerations? And he made a few adjustments. And what happened was we used that rank ordered list in that session over and over and over again to make choices about features. And we had a side benefit that was really cool because the CIO came in and he was observing the planning session. And one of the business people listed on a card a feature. It was basically a chunky story that he wanted in the next release. And one of the other business people said, no, we shouldn't be working on this. Remember that? And he pointed to the decision poster, and he pointed to the value considerations and said, that's not one of our value considerations for the next release. And this was with the CIO present. They just let it go. So that was an option we're not going to spend any time on. So it helped the group save time, eliminate waste, studying something or planning for something, a feature that didn't align to the value. So this was really neat because it had an additional benefit that the value considerations and having clarity around decision making also helped the group monitor how it was spending time, how it was collaborating and doing work. Okay? So value considerations and transparent decision making is crucial, and it's really crucial to being able to move quickly and make good choices. So let's talk for a moment about tools. What tools do you use? And what I mean by a tool, it could be a tool, not software tools. No, that's not what I'm asking here about value tools. I'm talking about techniques. For example, some of you may use something called value points, or you may use a ranking scheme that you've agreed upon. Some people use Moscow rules. Some of you know about that. That's used by dynamic system development method. That's where that came from. Must, should, could, won't. Do you use other tools for ranking or arraying your options, your stories, your requirements? Anybody? No? You don't use anything?
Quite honestly, I'm not sure how they rank them.
Not sure how you rank them, how the customer is ranking, how your product champion is ranking them?
Exactly. It's kind of why I'm here, is to get some ideas to maybe help them.
Okay, so not sure, but they're maybe saying, here, do this in this order.
Exactly.
All right, and you, sir?
So sometimes cost versus the perceived value.
So there's somebody's making an evaluation of the cost of building this feature versus the perceived.
Yeah, so they may have a feature that they perceive as valuable, but then when IT comes back and says that feature will cost you X, then they're like, I don't want to spend X.
Okay, they don't want to spend it. So it's sort of a heuristic, somebody's doing something in their head there. Well, let me just pause for a moment. There are a lot of tools out there that you could use for valuing different options. There's a lot of stuff here. For example, some of the tools are more strategic in nature in this word cloud. So Porter's 5 forces, for example, is more strategic. Or the alignment model is more strategic. So that might be an option for valuing. Some of these techniques or tools are very, very analytic and numeric. So you may use something like a prioritization feature of prioritization matrix with ranking numbers, and you're using numbers. And some of them are more heuristic, taking rule sets from expert thinking. The Kano or Kano model, some of you may be familiar with, is an example of that. Or the Boston box, so you're working with quadrants. Wow, there's a lot of stuff here. The point is, you don't want to be using all of this stuff, maybe one or two. But what we have found is the value considerations inform your choices of which and of the tools that you might use. For example, if you use a prioritization matrix, the columns on that matrix, whether it's weighted prioritization or not, those columns will be the value considerations. And you might use that same tool with different value considerations at different point in time. Now, many of you know that expression, right, about tools? Yeah? What's the expression that we use about tools and fools?
A fool with a tool is still a fool.
Right, a fool with a tool is still a fool. We want to use these tools purposefully to serve us, not having them serve them. So knowing your value considerations and your decision rule is crucial. This tool, whatever, if you use one of these tools, is not the decision itself. It informs the evaluation. That's it. Now the last important step is to measure the delivered value. And probably some of you have heard this term, hypothesis. that we have a hypothesis and that we're going to build something and test it. That's very popular in the world of Agile right now because of lean startup. And these are fabulous ideas. Now, I'm married to a research scientist, so he gave me a whole exposition on what hypothesis really means in science, and it's actually quite involved. But essentially, our take in the software and product development and delivery world is that you have some assumption or some idea or some proposition that needs to be tested. And that's really what we're doing at every delivery cycle. We have a portion of the product that we think is going to give us this value. So we need to test it, we need to confirm it. And that's the last portion going back to our model, that we look at the actual results from each delivery and compare and see, did it give us the ends? Now, beware. If you're not living in a lean startup world, you can't get those actual results to compare right away. And if you're in a lean startup, you may be able to, and software lean startup in particular, you may be able to get feedback in a couple of hours that same day. If you're working with a large legacy product, that feedback and the post-release feedback may not take place for a period of months or weeks. You may not know if you've increased your sales. You may not know if you've saved operational expenses. And you also need to be careful not to burden the business with metrics that don't already exist and making it more of a hassle to test your assumptions. Okay? So that's the fourth step. And we looked at these 4 steps, and I'm going to review them in a minute around value. And remember, these are meta steps, but I want to caution you, really, that when you are doing this work, when you're looking at the partners, when you're explicitly talking about the value considerations and transparent decision making, you know what? You are going to, I'll be honest with you, you will surface some possibly uncomfortable political issues in your organization. So I want you to be very mindful of that. Okay? So the value steps, the big picture. First, we define the ends. Those goals, the objectives, the metrics. What's the end game that we have here? Then we figure out who is in the product partnership. Who are the different partners? And we need to elicit their value considerations. And as we said, we also, as part of this, need to be very clear about decision making and know that the value considerations can change with time, and different partners will have different value considerations. Then we use the structured conversation to select the high-value product needs, right? We explore options, we make our value decisions, we define the value already in step number 2, and then we test. We confirm to learn that we built the right stuff. So here we put the whole model together, the value model together. The ends are delivered via the product options that we have, and those options are selected from the value considerations of the partners who have to weigh the benefits and risks. Those impacts will then yield a decision that we then test after delivery. Okay? So for me, what I found is that there's sort of acceptance criteria around good value decisions. And I'll use an acronym of CURED. They're cured decisions. Remember, value is about making decisions in the end. And we want them to be collaborative. We want to engage all the partners. So we have all those perspectives. Understandable to everyone. So any stakeholder up and down in the organization can understand why those choices were made. And again, I find that there's a lot of learning by having people share those value considerations with each other. We'll use this same meta approach at every planning horizon, so it's repeatable. Big view, preview, now view, whatever you want to call those horizons, you can do it again and again. And it turns out to be very efficient and very fast. Literally, you can circle things with a marker very quickly. And then finally, it's defensible. So just like understandable, anybody in the organization can say, yes, this is why we made these decisions. We've gone through that thought process. We've used these value considerations. We looked at this tool, maybe a weighted criteria matrix or Kano, and plotted these things just to double check our thinking if that's useful. So we want to make our decisions very explicit and have value be something real, not a mantra that we're just going to throw around. So I hope I've given you some concrete ideas that you can make use of, and we're going to do a drawing. And I'm just going to draw the names, and also, and there's some information about what we do. There's one other thing I want to let you know about some resources here before, let me just point to this just for a second. If you didn't get the book and you're interested in it, there's a discount code for you. And in particular, on the book's website, Discover to Deliver, we put a whole bunch of resources out there, mappings if you're interested to the different bodies of knowledge. And we also, just last week, put a resource you can download your own options board. So those images, you can download and print those and use them on the wall. We have teams that just leave that up and change the paper. So I wanted you to know about that. And I have put together recently a new list of value considerations, looking at patterns by partner. You can download that when you sign up. So, Dave?
And for Ellen's value she gave to us, don't forget to fill out your surveys.
Please.
To give value back.
Whoops. Is this both of the bags combined?
Yeah, both bags
Okay.
combined.
So I'm going to call out your name, and since we have to clear out of the room, they asked me to go into the tent. So Dave, what's the first?
I have Barb Zubin.
Barb here? Okay, that's one.
That's one. I have Andrew Drake.
Andrew, you're here? He's here? Whoops.
Oops,
That's the one.
that's the one. Excuse me. I have Stephen Finley.
Stephen here? Great. Meet me in the tent. I have 8 to give away, so there's a COHAA
We
person.
have Reshma Pathar. On down. We have Randy Bab.
Okay, how many do we have? I can keep going here, y'all.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Okay, here's another one.
We have Jared Ferris. Here.
Jared, are you here? Okay, that's 6.
We have Jeffrey Griffith. 7. And last but not least, we have Jaspred
Gruel? Are you here? Okay.
Okay.
Great. Meet you in the tent. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.